Hey everyone, we're here to talk about federated search with Drupal, Solr, and React, and just a little bit about that. This was sort of our solution for the void that was left when the Google Search Appliance and things like that where they stopped supporting that, so a lot of our clients had to figure out what they were going to do with their search solutions, and this is what we came up with. So just a bit on what we're going to be doing today. Obviously introductions, we're going to do a project overview, why did we build it, and what exactly did we build. We're going to show you it. We're going to show a little bit on how it works. We're not going to go too in-depth, we're just going to kind of explain the components, and we're going to show you how you can get started using it on your sites, and then answer any questions that you guys have at the end. Hopefully answer those questions. So Dan and I both work for Palantir.net. Palantir.net is a digital consultancy who provides web strategy, design, development services to clients in higher ed, healthcare, government, and beyond. So that's our team up there. And then my name is Matt Carmichael. I am an engineer at Palantir.net. I've been working with Drupal for about 3 years now. I mostly do back-end work. I do a little bit of front-end work. This project actually got me really interested in React. That's one of the components that it uses, so I've been trying to learn a lot about that lately as well.
And I am Dan Montgomery. I'm a senior engineer and technical architect at Palantir. When I get a chance, I'd like to work on React a lot as well, so excited to be here.
Cool. So project overview, as we just kind of alluded to, this project uses React to actually display our search results. It uses Solr as the index, and then obviously Drupal to sort of connect the two, and we'll go into that a little bit more throughout this presentation. But we've been working with the University of Michigan for a while now, specifically on their healthcare sites. And so they have a handful of Drupal 7 sites and a couple of Drupal 8 sites. I think it's something like 6 and 2, something like that. But essentially they have a few Drupal sites that they wanted to, or that they were using Drupal Search Appliance to sort of get search results from all of the sites in one result set. And then when Google end-of-lifed that project, they were kind of left with the void of what do we do? We want sort of that same functionality, but we're not sure where to get it or how to get it. So they came to us, us being Palantir. Our team did Spike and realized that it's not that difficult to actually index multiple sites into the single Solr server. The issue that they had was, how do you take these sites that have different content models, they have different content types, the taxonomies don't align, how do they take all that and put that into a unified index? And the other issue was, how do you display those results consistently in a way that matches the theme, obviously, but how do you display those consistently across all of the sites? So like I said, we took, one of our team members took a few days to run a spike on that and figure things out, and the solution...
What do you mean by a spike?
What was that?
What do you mean by a spike?
Sorry. He just spun up a couple Drupal sites and just dug in there and kind of just messed around with things and figured out what solution would be viable.
Like a research spike?
Right. So just trying to figure out how we could solve this problem for the client. And this presentation is about what we came up with. So essentially what they want is Google on their website. It's tough to build Google, believe it or not. So we came up with our best solution for it. And one of the tough things was the how Google sort of crawls the websites. We didn't have the time to write the crawler. So we leveraged Drupal in a couple ways to make that a little bit easier to set up config that will, as opposed to the crawlers crawling your site, you can kind of map how things will map into the index yourself, and then after that, it kind of just does the work in indexing. So again, they had the Google Search Appliance that was end of life, and then there was Google Site Search that they also discontinued or stopped supporting. And then,
Which are, right, just like, I think one of them is you can purchase a physical hardware and host it internally, and the other one is like a similar product, but I think it's hosted for you. That's the main difference.
yeah, so that's what I understand. So after breaking down their needs and thinking about what solution would work, these are kind of the parameters for the unified search solution that we came up with. So one, we needed a simple way to store, retrieve, and parse the data. Obviously, all search applications need that. They needed it to be cross-platform because they have the Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 sites that they wanted to be able to search all from one index. And then they needed it to be speedy, usable, and responsive. That's where the React side comes in. We'll show you in the demo in a bit, but it's super fast, super usable. And then it obviously needed to be flexible and extensible and reusable. We didn't want it to be something like that you just drop in and it is what it is, like display-wise and things like that with the facets. So we kind of made sure that all of the sites could edit it how they needed it to, exactly how it needed to look and work. And then obviously we wanted it to be a drop-in replacement for the Google projects, and it is, it's pretty easy to get started on, and then you can kind of customize it as needed. So we'll show you that as well.
How did you get to like the list of the differences between the things? Was it something you did on your own, or did you have interviews with the?
What do you mean the differences?
Like, so you have, you said there's 6 or 7 sites you're trying to
Right.
implement this on with different stuff. Did you
Right.
figure that yourself, or did you go through some sort of process where you were interviewing or gathering data from people at Michigan?
Can you repeat the question for the recording?
Yeah.
Sorry. So the question was, how did we sort of figure out the differences between the different sites and how we'd have to deal with those when putting them into the single index?
Yeah.
Sorry. The way that we did that is we did a lot of research on just general search applications and search boxes throughout the web. So what works best for people, what results display best, and sort of the best user experience. And then we actually built this application in a way where you have those default fields that you'll see. And then you're able to, on the Drupal side of things, map each content type. So for example, there's a field, Federated date. So that will add a facet for date, and then you can kind of decide, like, are we going to use the published date? Are we going to use the date created? Things like that, last updated. And we're going to show that in a bit here as well.
Getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, I
It's a
think
great question.
So there was a couple different stages of like user testing and collaboration. So so that part, there was some user testing of the application to see what people wanted to use the most, or like how they wanted to use it. There was also, I think, a lot of conversations with the University of Michigan. Avi might have more information.
We had a strategist come in too and work with the client. The strategist went through all the sites and kind of took an inventory of all the fields on the sites, and then worked with the client to reconcile all of that and figure out what the best schema what the best way to put it all together would be.
Cool.
So it was both like an internal discovery and an external discovery process.
Yeah, so if for the recording, what Avi was mentioning was there was a strategy phase at the beginning of the project where they canvassed all the sites, kind of, and did architecture work to figure out how to map those things with the customer. Cool. Yeah, we're gonna. That's a very good question. So, we're trying to deal with some screen stuff for a second here, but then I think we're good. Did we bring them back? I think you can just, just check it and it should work.
Cool. So now we're going to take a minute to give you a quick live demo. sometimes it's kind of hard to just follow words about these things, so we're just going to
Great.
dive in and show you how it works. So this, do you want to explain this? Or?
Sure. Yeah, so this is a Drupal 8 website. So we have a demo repo where we put a bunch of different sites. This application works on Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. So this demo repo has some internal tools that Palantir uses. Is this kind of small? I'm gonna.
No, it's fine.
No. Okay. It's basically a search box. So the demo repo is a public repo that anybody can download. You could spin this up. You get a Drupal 7 site, you get a Drupal 8 site, you get default content, and then you basically, for Drupal 8, you get this umami theme, which seems like everybody's using, and it's super helpful for demos because you don't have to make something for yourself. And the Drupal 7 site uses, I think, Develop Generate to just create some random content. It also includes a Solr server, and so we have all that running. And this is going to show kind of how this works. So you could, since it's the umami site, you could do a search for pasta. You can see very quickly this is all local, but very quickly the results show up. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. All right. So you can see the search results show up very quickly with a lot of the common features like sorting and the counts. The filters have been updated on the left. This is all happening without page reload since it's a React app. And then you can start to see the search results, and we've tagged the sites here to just kind of indicate that this is coming from this demo site. It's using a Drupal 8 site that's using domain access, so we wanted to make sure that it worked with those modules as well. And then we're actually on this site here. So this piece of content is from the current site that we're on, and this other piece of content is from another site that's also running on that demo environment. So you're seeing recipes, articles, it's doing the highlighting, a lot of stuff that you expect out of search results. And this is all doing it without page reload. So there's also facets. So there's a couple default facets that come. With a recent version, you can disable the defaults if you don't want to use them. The defaults include things like, that got formatted a little weird, but there's minimal styling out of the box. Sometimes it looks better than that, and sometimes it looks a little weird. But yeah, so you're seeing those same sites that I kind of mentioned before, and then if you select them, it immediately adds that as a filter, and the results get updated. So if anybody's familiar, I think we're all kind of somewhat familiar with the React stuff. It happens immediately because it already has a lot of this data, and so you get very quick responses. You can deselect that and kind of go back to where you were. You can filter by content type, so I'm not sure what's going on with these checkboxes, but yeah, so you can filter by articles or recipes. That kind of updates the other facets immediately to only show things that are relevant. Date has filters, and then some of the ones that are not out of the box but are configurable are things like, in this case, ingredients doesn't apply to all websites, but it does on this one. And we've added one for pasta, which this is the only one that's been tagged with this. So we can talk about that a little bit more later, but the way that these extra filters work is a little bit more hands-on, but it's built in a flexible way to support kind of any type of site. So for this umami site, we were able to configure that and add a facet for ingredients and then kind of figure out how that works. But on a site that, like University of Michigan Health, like it doesn't have those same filters. So yeah, it has a lot of, sorry.
We got a question?
So if we take a look at this page, which part is what's being is the filter part of the React app? Like what's React on there and what's just like Drupal in the background?
So yeah, everything you see is React. Essentially the way it's displayed
Except for
is, except for, yeah. So the React is embedded in the Drupal site. All of the search elements are
So
React.
basically the content frame is
Right.
all React, and the rest of the container it's in is Drupal.
Right,
Mhm.
so we're going to show you a bit later. All of the markup in this template file is just a div with a ID of root, and then the React app looks for that div. It just kind of dumps all of its display in there.
Everything below the breadcrumbs.
Right.
I don't think, oh yes, yes, not the
questions.
breadcrumbs.
Is the experience for the user any different if they're logged in, where either you're tagging with protected content or anything, or is it just the same experience whether you're logged in?
In terms of this search
The
results
facets,
page?
the display, the saves favorite, or is there any
Yeah.
difference in function?
Right now, there's no like authenticated user edition, so this is the same experience. And we'll actually come back to that, I think, in a minute about like what this means, because this isn't. Well, I guess I'll just jump there. Like, you could put this on any website. Like, this part of it is not Drupal specific. There are some things to make the Drupal implementation easier to set up, but you could put this React app on any website, and it would still pull these results in and display them. So if you had WordPress sites in your network and you wanted it to show the similar results, you could do that. This part is not Drupal specific.
And the second part is,
Yeah.
with the different sites, do you have the capability to go across sites, or is it all whatever site you're on, that's what it's searching and that's the display?
No, yeah. So in this case, this is an example where this is. I'll just click on them. This is one website, and this is a different website. So I know that they look pretty similar, but let me do a better search and do something that is clearly not that site. So this is the Drupal 7 site. It just uses that develop content. So this is an article on the Drupal 7 site. So this was, if you can see, it's very small, I think, but the domain is D8-1, which is the domain access website. This one is just D8, which is the single site. And then this website is the Drupal 7 site, D7. So all of these results are showing in those search results, and that was the main use case. There are features that if you want to either by default or just period only search one site for any given site, those are options as well. But the default, I should have repeated the question. The question was basically, are you limited to searching results within one site? So hopefully that answers that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the results are just interacting with the Solr server, so it's kind of independent of what's going on in Drupal, which is what Dan mentioned, how after the content's indexed, it's basically just Solr and React interacting, and they're just displaying on your Drupal site using that that template that I just mentioned a little while ago.
Yeah, let's jump into some of the specifics. I think these are really good questions, so if you have them, just let us know, or we'll come back to that stuff too. So, all right. Okay. I don't know how to do that. My skills with Google presentations are not always great. Yeah, so this is a kind of, we've talked about already. The three components are Solr, Drupal, and React. Solr is used as the search storage. Drupal is used, in this case, to create and send the content. Both Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 are supported with this. And React is used for the presentation. There's a little bit more. You could add Drupal again here. So previous, other versions of this talk have talked about it as the cyclical process. If you want to know more about that, talk to Avi. Where Drupal comes in again, where there is another Drupal module that's then displaying those search results. So it's involved in the beginning where it's indexing content to Solr, but then it's also used in the presentation part as well. So we just have it listed here once, but it's used in different ways. So this is, so Solr, if you've used it before, it's pretty flexible, but there is a value in having consistent ways of storing data. So you can set it up where either it will just, you specify exactly what the schema is or the fields that you're going to index in Solr, and then you have to create content for that. You might be familiar with a little bit, like if you've worked on Acquia Search before, when you've probably never configured Solr, or you may not have configured Solr directly. So Solr also supports a method where if you send data and you're telling it fields that it's never heard of, it can just create those fields on the fly. In either of those situations, you probably want to have some sort of uniform structure, and that uniform structure is really one of the bigger challenges that we were trying to solve for. And Matt's talked about that a little before. So what what we're looking at here is that the index, this is what the index kind of looks like at the end of the day. We came up with that uniform structure where we said, okay, everything needs certain fields, and then we can use those fields in some flexible ways. So you did see the facets, and those were ways that those were used a little bit more flexibly, but everything needs something like a title, a date, a type, so that was the content type. A lot of content's going to use images. They don't have to use images, but that's something that a lot of the fields are going to use. Rendered items, like what are we searching through primarily? So are we going to create a version of that content that is the rendered version of that content? And then we need a URL because this could live on any website. It's not just going to live on the same Drupal site. And site name in case you want to filter by site names, and then the site. So, which
This
was
is your entire index?
This is.
yeah.
So, yeah.
I guess I skipped over terms, but yeah.
Yeah. How it works is we'll explain sort of how Drupal is going to feed into it, but pretty much all of your content types will have this data more or less in them, and then we'll kind of map to these exact fields.
Yeah, and I think one of the key points to look at here is that none of this is Drupal specific. So you can use different Drupal websites. You can use those different, versions of Drupal websites that have different fields, but you want to create this consistent format.
Question, you guys do. The one thing I feel like is there's like a description or body.
Yeah, so the equivalent here is this rendered item, and then in the search results before, it was using the highlight pattern where it was just finding text that matched and then like bolding those words, which I think were delivered by Solr as part of, yeah. Cool. The question, sorry, I'm going to keep forgetting this. The question was that there's no body field listed here. And how does that work? Cool. All right, so if you've used Solr before, or if you haven't, Solr provides this admin interface that's very, very convenient if you're doing local development. And this is what it looks like. This is what this slide particularly is demonstrating is the way that Solr formats its data. It might be a little bit hard to see, but essentially Solr out of the box supports exporting data as JSON. And that's a really convenient way of importing data into React apps or other apps. So Solr was a good solution because we were familiar with it from the indexing part, and also because it's very good at sending the data back out. So getting data in and sending the data out is very convenient. And you can see that those same fields are the ones that are being listed here. The structure is very simple. It's basically a couple high-level fields of like how many results there were, and then it just lists the documents. Solr calls individual pieces of content documents, and then all the fields with their values. All right, so I think that's good.
So yeah, that's kind of an explanation of the Solr side of things, and then next we're going to look at React a little bit. So actually we found this repo, Solr Faceted Search React, and we found that it actually did a lot of the sort of work that we wanted to do. So this repo takes the Solr results and displays them in a very, rigid way. Like there's one way that it gets displayed, and it works, but it's not ideal, I guess. So we actually forked off of this repo, and then made some modifications, made it a little bit more extendable, made it themable, and sort of made it our own. And like Dan said, React loves to consume JSON, so it kind of works perfectly with Solr, and this repo sort of facilitated a lot of that work for us. So here's a look at that repo that I just showed you. You can see it works. It has facets. It has your results. Not formatted great, but it gets the job done. So we saw this and thought, this is a good base. Let's build on it. Let's add some fields like images, narrow things down a bit to our liking to work with those fields that Dan just showed you, and add a little bit more complexity to your options when dealing with filtering and facets and things like that. And it also was MIT licensed for reuse, so that was good. And just another note, our project's no longer dependent on this. so you don't really have to keep up with what they're doing on this project specifically. We just kind of use what they had, and we've been maintaining it. So just a little note, you don't have to really keep track of that. And then this is kind of what we spun out of it. You saw the live demo. Just kind of going back and forth, you can see they're pretty similar. You have the facets on the left side and the results on the right. We just kind of cleaned it up based on some of that research that we mentioned earlier on what people actually want from a good search application. So yeah, that is a bit on how we got to the React side of things. And then, again, like I said, this was designed to be skinned, so you can make it look however you need it to look. It'll kind of be seamless with your site. It won't look like you just dropped in a big clunky search application with table views and things like that. So, and the markup that we use is all semantic and easy, so you can actually theme this with just one CSS file, just a single CSS file. And as you can see, the markup should look pretty familiar, and your team shouldn't really have any issues looking through that. So yeah, that's a bit on the React side. Again, we have the Solr side that's getting indexed. You have your all of your results stored in Solr. React is actually the part that is taking those results and displaying them. Kind of explaining again how Drupal isn't really involved in that process. It's just kind of a facilitator, if you will.
Cool. So yeah, so once we have, so how Drupal's involved. So Drupal, we mentioned, was involved in indexing the results consistently. In this sense, like, this is what the document looks like. It's a little bit larger now. But we've covered this already, but basically you don't have to use Drupal to index content. If you're using WordPress or some other system, you can do that as well. We haven't used a non-Drupal website yet, but you could do that, and that's supported. So if you want to fork this for a non-Drupal website or add in support, then that would work as well. So as long as all the websites are sending the same sorts of requests to index documents to Solr, then you should be good to go. Yeah, so the other part, this is the other part of Drupal. So essentially, like, when you're loading Drupal, like, what am I saying? So to get this on your Drupal website, there is a module that will help you configure it. So it basically lets you say, this is the route that I want this search page to show up on, this is some of the configuration options that I want, and then it'll create that page and put that search block on there. And there's some other ways that you can go about configuring the display of it with the styling that we're not going to cover now, but those are all sort of planned ways that you can use this module. You can add flexibility. It's not at a predefined space. You don't have to, like, just copy the code and load the library. All of that is kind of bundled up into a Drupal module to make that as a drop-in solution. And then that works with the Drupal 7 and the Drupal 8 versions. So yeah, you can see, like, in this case, the configuration is being passed in to the React app from that Drupal system, so it has that configuration form and passes it in, and then it's just render as Matt mentioned, like, it's rendering this placeholder essentially that the JavaScript knows to replace with the React app. Cool. So yeah, Drupal's not required, but it's making it easier in this case since it's the one that's been supported. Yep.
I assume that only one site needs this Drupal search module in it, and like the other ones that are feeding data, well, I guess maybe they do too.
Yeah, so the question was, like, which Drupal sites need what, I think?
Well, so the React app only has to be in one, even though it can serve results from others Drupal sites. So the
Yeah.
Drupal 7 site and all that, it's not going to run the React.
So in the example for University of Michigan, every website has a copy of those modules because they're all showing in search pages.
Okay.
And so yeah, those will all show them, and then there's a set of modules. There's a set of modules that do the indexing and then to sending the documents to Solr, and then there's the modules that display the results. And so depending on whether or not you want to index from sites and or display results, you can kind of do them independently.
Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, I think I read them.
Sure. So now we're going to kind of get into a little bit of the config. I know there's been a lot of questions on that. How you sort of actually set this up. And we'll go through some examples and hopefully have a better understanding of that. So this depends on the standard search API config. That does a lot of the kind of Drupal, on the Drupal side of things, that sets things up for you to as far as like setting up the Solr server and the indexes and things like that. And then you're going to need a local Solr server only for development purposes, but you definitely need that. The alternative for, I guess, production sites would be having independent Solr hosts, so something like Search Stacks, I think we use a lot, or just hosting that elsewhere. But for testing, it's always nice to have your local server set up.
Yeah, maybe as like an aside, so we're currently working with better support for Acquia. So the way that Acquia has Solr set up, it's limited. It has limited access to only the Drupal application, and as the React app needs to access the Solr server directly, that is an issue. So on the particular project, we use Search Stacks as an external Solr server, and Search Stacks provides. I'm not trying to give an advertisement for Search Stacks, but it did work out well. They provide access restrictions, so you can, or I'm not sure the best way to say it, but essentially you can set up security measures so that not anybody can just send content to the search server, and not anybody can just pull from it. You can kind of set up the permissions there, and you know which types of routes and which types of users can access things. So.
So again, these are just kind of the fields. So you have date, image, terms, title, type, and then the HTML output or body, the site, and the site URL. And this is just kind of recapping that structure. And then in the next couple of slides, we'll show how you actually map your different content types to these fields. But yeah, you always have this standard schema.
Yeah, if people are not familiar, this is the standard Drupal 8 configuration for how you set up Solr indexes. So you kind of turn it on and you don't have anything, and you have to add any fields that you want to add. So these are you specify labels, you specify machine names, and then it kind of helps you build that process. So this is what it looks like completed, and Matt's going to go over, some of these are very straightforward, and some of them, we're going to talk in more detail because the things like the custom facets and on other fields.
Right. So yeah, let's just dive into a quick example. So here you have the federated type content type, the federated type index field. So this is going to deal with content types. So in the search results, you can remember above each, within each result, you saw the content type above the title. And this is the interface where you kind of specify what you want that title to be. So sometimes, like we said, when you're coming from multiple sites, you have a bunch of different content types that might be similar, but they have different names on the different sites. So for example, here you can see that we have the article, and we decided we want the display name in your search facets to be blog article. And then if you jump down to, let's say, podcast, you can see that we also chose blog article for that content type. And the reasoning there would be you don't want facets for article, podcast, video, and listicle all separate that your user would have to click when they're going to get, I guess, kind of similar content out of them. So when you use the same title for multiple types, that allows you to have one checkbox that you would click, and then you get a listing of all of those articles. So that was kind of the thought process there as to why you can set these as opposed to just coming in by default with whatever content types that you're using from the sites. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. And then, so just to jump back really quick, these are all, I guess, like static values, like you're setting them and that's what they are. Alternatively, you can use tokens, so similar to like Path Auto or something like that. You can see here for the date field, federated date, we have a majority of the nodes just using the date created because that's what makes sense most of the time. But on the articles, maybe the date created isn't as valuable as the date that it was published. Obviously, to your site users, that's when that's the date that's important to them. So this just kind of shows that you can differentiate different date fields as needed, and how to show that the tokening system will also work here. And you can see at the bottom we have the token browser for you to go through if you need any help with that. And then the last example I'll show you is the images. And you can see this is also tokenized, and it supports multiple media types, so you can decide which media type that you want the image to display in to kind of, I guess, normalize your image display results, if that makes sense. But here we're just using the Search API Federated Solr image media type. So you can see node field image, and then the media type is Search API Federated Solr image.
Is that a media type or a view mode?
Yeah, the view modes.
Sorry, view mode. Sorry about that. But yeah, that comes with the module. So that will allow you to kind of get some uniform results with regards to the images. And then, one more example. We have the site name field, and this just allows you to enter whatever site name you want your users to see. Sometimes, as developers, we might not use the best site names for our Drupal site names, so this allows you to, I guess, correct that if you have not so user-friendly site name. And then, as Dan mentioned, this module works well with domain access. Ken on our team, Ken Rickard, does a lot of work with domain access, and as the project owner of this specific project, he really pushed for that. So, and the University of Michigan used it as well, so we had to make sure that that was a feature. But this is just showing the configuration if you're using domain access on your sites.
Yeah, if people aren't familiar with domain access, it's a way of having multiple sites live within one Drupal site. So it looks to the outside world as if it's maybe several different sites. You're creating content within that single site, and then depending on where they're coming from, you see different versions of the website, essentially. So this is just, yep.
If this was a single site or a multi-site, this site name would just have one field.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
that
and
was-
then if you need to, you can
Yeah.
kind of split them out. Yep.
So yeah. And then the taxonomy field. So this is kind of where you get that flexibility of being able to really get as granular as you want with your facets. So going through your taxonomy terms and allowing those to be searchable or facetable. So one of the big problems with this is that when you're using multiple sites, you can probably imagine you have a ton of vocabularies with a ton of different terms. There's going to be some overlap there. And similar to where I showed you the content type field, you're not going to want that overlap where you're going to have maybe like two terms in the facets that have essentially the same meaning, but just because of how the taxonomies are set up, you'll have maybe like vegetarian and then vegetarian foods, where that's not a great user experience. So we came up with a pretty good solution to that, but it takes a little bit more legwork than the sort of tokenized configuration that you've seen so far. So if you try to edit the taxonomy or the federated terms section on the Search API config, you'll get hit with this big block that pretty much explains what I explained to you. you can't really do this on the config side of things. You're going to actually go into the taxonomy term config, or the settings for that taxonomy term. You're going to add a field called federated terms, and then you're going to configure it term by term, as opposed to having to take your entire site and sort of consolidate your taxonomy terms, or take all of your sites and consolidate those terms. This allows you to go in and kind of do that in a different way. So this is the interface you're going to get. So this is a taxonomy term called dermatology. So let's say you have this term, and then you have another term that's, I don't know, dermatology, or dermatology department, or something just derivative of this. You'd be able to go into this federated terms field, and then we're going to add a specialty facet option. So specialty will be the sort of title of that facet section, and then dermatology will be the checkbox. And then you can also add multiples. So as you can see, we also added skincare. So anytime someone's on your search app and they check dermatology, you'll see this. And if they check skincare, you'll also see this. So it's essentially building a new taxonomy, but without having to create the taxonomy, add it to all of your add it to all of your content types, and then go edit every single node. You can kind of just do it in the taxonomy term itself, which sort of expedites things a bit. And yeah, so this is the interface. You add the top level, which is specialty, which is that listing, and then you can just kind of keep going down as needed using the caret symbol. So yeah, Drupal provides, so putting it all together, we said this a bunch now, but just to recap, Drupal provides the indexing, the search page callback that actually renders that React, and the search box itself, or the search block that might be in your heading. So that kind of rounds up all three sections. So yeah, it's kind of hard to follow. It's a lot easier if you get into our demo environment and kind of play with it yourself. You'll kind of see how you can go through, and the federated terms, editing those taxonomies is actually really cool, pretty intuitive, and it's a much quicker solution than the alternative. So just being able to go in there and play with it would definitely be ideal. So how would you do that? How do you get started? If you did want to go mess around with this, or maybe add it to one of your projects, Dan's going to explain a bit about that.
Yeah, so some of the stuff that you've seen is we've tried to decouple all the pieces as much as possible. So a lot of that stuff that we just went over of remapping isn't necessarily something that you would only want to do if you're using this React app for displaying the results. So a lot of those pieces have, I guess I'm jumping ahead, sorry. I'll come back to that. But essentially, a lot of those pieces are independent modules in Drupal 8. So there's I think I'm jumping to this one.
Yeah.
Let me come back to that other one in a second, sorry. So there's a Search API federated Solr module. There's also this API field map. So this API field map is independent of the, it just provides that mapping functionality, and you might want to do that to consolidate values even if you're not using the full solution. All right, so I skipped ahead, but this is the URL for the demo site, and these slides will be posted. The demo site that we use Mac development environment, so this is what that's most likely going to work on. It may work as well with other tools. It's pretty simple to set up once you have some standard tools like Composer, VirtualBox, Ansible, and Vagrant set up. You can kind of spin the whole thing, and it's using some task runners to install those sites. And this is listed in the repos README. To install those sites, set up the example content, set up the Solr server, it kind of spins it all up for you. I think the newer versions are also going to configure some of those taxonomy terms, so it'll even give you kind of a head start to see what that might look like. Yeah, so again, we talked about the demo a little bit, and the demo we're running is a version of that, and it uses Drupal 7 and 8. The modules, the Drupal 8 and Drupal 7 modules are very similar. The main difference is that there's a little bit more of a focus on Drupal 8 just because, I don't know, I think a lot of people are focusing on Drupal 8. So that one functionality for mapping different strings or mapping the terms is supported in Drupal 8 as its own module, but within 7 it's just bundled with the other module. There's some specific versions. I don't think there's much that's important about those. That's what's part of the demo environment. The key point is that it is using Apache Solr 4.5.1, which is the version that Acquia, I don't know if 4.5.1 is the exact version, but it's similar to the version that Acquia is using with Acquia Search. And because a lot of people are using Acquia and Acquia Search, we wanted to kind of test against that. But the live versions that we've also tested against are running newer versions of Solr, and they do support more features, but there's not like a huge difference in terms of using that version or another. I don't think you would have to change anything unless you wanted features that weren't supported in older versions of Solr. All right. I think we want to open up questions. I think maybe, that sounds good. So thanks everyone for doing this, and now we want to kind of open it up again to questions.
Not a question. So I noticed that the site was in the faceted search. This came up actually not too long ago, maybe last week. We were looking at our own faceted search, which is a third-party tool, and they were trying to see if you could do a search that would only show one site by default, depending on what site you were coming from to do the search. But our search actually lives somewhere else, so it's sort of like we have to pass that. Does yours have any capability for that sort of thing?
Yeah. So the question was, is there capability for filtering out to just one site depending on which site you're coming from? So there was a release of a lot of this work yesterday, and it introduced a bunch of features that we weren't showing in the demo. One of the features is support for more URL parameters. So some of those are pre-filtering things based on where you're coming from, so you might want to filter by that. And so you could have the experience where you're using the same application, but depending on what site you're in, you either start with it filtered to a specific site, or you just don't even show the option to filter by different sites. But yeah, that was a big request. I think some of the other features that were added, maybe we can talk about those a little bit real quick, was support for searching across a wider range of those fields, and adding autocomplete, and adding sort of more wildcard features to the search. So these aren't necessarily, I think the wildcard maybe you want to talk a little bit about.
Yeah, so if you saw in the demo, initially, if there was no search, there were just no results, and that was kind of left things blank. So now you have an option to, just with a checkbox, say, if there are no results, just do a wildcard search where you would just get whatever results it wanted to return, just for a more user-friendly experience. So you don't have that empty page when your users first get there. It might look a little broken.
Yeah.
So, just to make sure I understand, the Drupal site, the modules that you have running on the core of the Drupal site, set up the React app, send all the settings down, and then from there, does the React app pull directly to the Solr server?
Right.
And Drupal's only involved in telling Solr, hey, look at these, and then on the page here, this is how you run your React app, and the React app then, okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Answer my own question.
So, yeah.
Do you remember where the configuration?
It's in search and metadata.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Would you recommend this for only bringing multiple sites together, or are there other cases where you would recommend this setup?
It's just the bringing multiple sites together is just kind of a feature that is useful in some cases, but everything else other than, I guess, kind of deciding which sites you want to see results from would still be incredibly useful on a single site. just to kind of get your search up and running in a pretty painless way.
Yeah, the question was if we would recommend using this if there was just a single site. So yeah.
Did you have to index any documents like PDFs? Or has it only been like web results that you've done? I have a number of clients with that need.
Yeah, the question was, have we indexed documents other than like files,
Right.
essentially? I don't believe no. Yeah, so that is the only files are images which are references. So I would imagine if you wanted to extend it and sort of have an additional field or something that like listed out these are the URLs for those files or something. But yeah, that's not a feature that's there right now.
Okay.
Yeah, this was what the configuration looks like on the Drupal side. So this is just logged in. You can set up the app path, and this is a slightly older version as well. But you can configure the app path. You can add some basic configuration for titles, search from the list of indexes. You could have multiple indexes. The security features that we mentioned before, the search stack supports basic authentication as a way of protecting against sending content. So that's somewhere that you could fill this in. And then depending on sort of the features that you have, there's some options around site names. And you can configure some other sort of basic features. So this is basically if you're going to display it on a Drupal 8 site, like you don't have to provide that much information, and there's defaults for you, and then you get that basic page. And if you want, you can start to customize the pieces and do things like the styling as well. So each site has its own styling and stuff. Cool. Any other questions?
What's the scale of the implementation you guys did? It was University of Michigan, right? It's like,
Yeah.
how big is their index? How many searches are they doing a day or a month? Any ideas?
I think they had like on the scale of tens of thousands of pages that were getting indexed. I don't know how much, or I don't know what the usage is.
Cool. The question was, what's the scale of the solutions that we've used so far? And we're not sure how many hits that the system gets, but I think you said like tens of thousands of documents are being indexed to the Solr server. Yeah, and I think the limitation here, I mean, the React app is going to be served by Varnish or whatever sort of caching system you have. And so the limitation is going to be on your Solr server because it's hitting the Solr server directly. So if the solution can scale, then that's probably something that would work well. Yeah, I mean, we have these sites running, so if you wanted to see some of the other configuration interfaces, we could do that if there's any other questions. We're also going to be here for, walking around the rest of today, so come let us know.
Have you tried to use any other CMS for this, like to send the index to Solr?
Yeah, the question was, have we used any other CMSs to send content? I don't believe that we have.
We have not, but yeah, as stated before, it's just kind of a matter of setting that whatever CMS you're using, it's a matter of setting it up so that the indexing works properly. So we just happen to make the Drupal app because we're Drupal developers. The Drupal module that does all that work for us. So it'd be pretty extensive to sort of test it on another CMS by essentially writing the exact same thing for a different one. But it should work if you configure it properly.
Yeah, and I think the requests for when you index content in Solr, like Drupal does a lot behind the scenes to format the connections, but the submissions are they're not that complex. So I would imagine it wouldn't be that difficult, especially if you had the specific format that you're looking to create. Yeah.
Do you know, can Solr handle authenticated content? So if you have content that's only for authenticated users, can you only return those results for users that are authenticated?
Yeah, so the question is, can you serve different results to authenticated users versus unauthenticated? So right now that's not a feature.
Okay.
I imagine you could set it up, but right now that's not a feature. Yep.
So I suppose if you want to make it easy for WordPress to adopt the same thing, you would have to implement as much as you could using PHP libraries that can be included with Composer, and then your actual Drupal module would be much smaller.
Yeah. So the Benji was recommending, using standard PHP libraries to do the indexing part. I don't know the specifics of what the Drupal. So a lot of this is on the Drupal code is focused around the existing Search API modules and the Solr integrations. So I don't know enough about those to know what they're using. I imagine a lot of it is very Drupal specific. But yeah, if we wanted it to be across more things, that would be a good direction. Cool. Any other questions? We have like some thank you slides that I want to get to before the end. Let's do those, and then if you have questions that come up, let us know. All right. So yeah, here's a list of people. Avi's in this room here. Adrian's in the room. You can talk to him as well. We mentioned Ken. So there's a long list of people that have been involved. University of Michigan obviously is a big one that we worked with for the initial implementation. For the version 2 that came out yesterday, we're working. I don't know if we've talked about them yet, but there are people that we're working with that are helping support that. So we're thankful for them as well. So it's a lot of people. We're getting some contributions from outside Palantir as well, and all this stuff is sort of available and open source. So if you're interested in it, let us know or kind of take a look with that demo site and see what see what looks good. So yeah, I don't remember if there's any pictures. These are our pictures.
Oh, that's what you look like.
Yeah. And then before we end, if you like this talk or if you didn't like this talk, please go to this number. If you can't remember this number, you can go to the schedule page and click on the session. That's what that goes to. And leave feedback. And then, there's a contribution day that's on Saturday from 10 to 4. And I think there's more information on the website as well. But, that's kind of some standard things. So thanks, everyone. And if you do have questions, let us know.